In the Middle Ages, it didn't take spells or potions to be called a witch. The things that got you killed back then are things we barely notice today. Here are 10 ordinary things that could have marked you for the fire. 10th, being left-handed. In the Middle Ages, left-handedness wasn't just unusual, it was feared. The Latin word for left is sinistra, which evolved into the English word sinister. This linguistic bias reflected deeper cultural fears. The left hand was associated with the devil, darkness, and unnatural behavior. If you wrote, gestured, or ate with your left hand, it was often interpreted as a sign that something was wrong with you, spiritually or morally. In a society where conformity meant safety, being left-handed made you suspicious. Teachers and priests would often force children to use their right hand, sometimes with beatings or binding the left hand behind the back. Even Christian rituals reinforce the idea. The right hand was the hand of blessing, virtue, and God's favor, while the left was for rejection and judgment. In some witch trials, being left-handed was actually listed as one of the evidences of witchcraft. It was just strange enough to scare people, and strange was dangerous. So if you were born left-handed in medieval Europe, you'd better hide it, or you might be next on the pyre. 9. Owning a cat, especially a black one. In the superstitious world of the Middle Ages, animals weren't just pets. They were believed to be spiritual messengers, and none stirred more fear than the common house cat. To own a cat, especially a black cat, was to invite whispers of witchcraft. People believed cats were familiars, demonic spirits gifted to witches by the devil himself. These creatures weren't just companions. They were said to spy, cast spells, or even transform into witches in disguise. Old women who lived alone with a cat were particularly vulnerable. In a time ruled by fear, even a purring companion could be your death sentence. 8. Knowing too much about herbs. In the Middle Ages, to heal was divine, unless you were a woman. If you knew how to ease a fever with willow bark, soothe childbirth with raspberry leaf, or stop bleeding with yarrow, you weren't seen as wise. You were seen as dangerous. Women, especially midwives, herbalists, and village healers, walked a thin line. Their knowledge of nature passed down through generations often made them the first accused when something went wrong. If a child died despite treatment, it was your fault. If a rival got sick after you handed them tea, you hexed them. If a lord's wife miscarried after drinking your brew, you summoned demons. So while your hands may have saved lives, they could also sign your death warrant. Healing in secret became survival, because in a world ruled by ignorance and fire, wisdom was a threat. 7. Being too beautiful or too ugly. In the medieval world, there was no safety in standing out. If you were too beautiful, they said you bewitched men, that your skin was too smooth, your eyes too sharp, your smile too persuasive to be natural. You were called a temptress, a siren, a servant of the devil sent to lure good men into sin. It didn't matter if you were kind, modest, or devout. Beauty was often equated with seduction, and seduction with sorcery. But if you were too ugly, hunched back, missing teeth, scarred, or with a face that made children cry, they said you were cursed, that your appearance reflected a rotten soul, that the devil had marked you with physical deformity. People would whisper that your ugliness came from the dark magic you practiced behind closed doors. Some women were accused simply because they aged badly or had a face others found unsettling. In this world, balance was safety. If you were plain, silent, and obedient, you might be ignored. But if you were either too radiant or too repulsive, you were a threat, and threats were burned. 6. Talking to yourself. In a time when superstition ruled and silence was safety, even the smallest murmurs could condemn you. If someone passed by your window and heard you muttering under your breath, they didn't think you were praying. They didn't think you were thinking. They thought you were casting spells. Whispering while stirring a pot? That was a potion. Reciting words alone in the woods? That was a curse. Talking to the wind, the moon, or even to yourself while doing chores? Proof that you had spirits listening. In truth, many women, especially the lonely, the elderly, or the grieving, developed habits of whispering to themselves out of isolation. But in the Middle Ages, there was no room for grief, reflection, or absent-minded thinking. If your lips moved and no one else was there to answer, they assumed someone unseen was. Even prayer, if said outside of church walls or not in Latin, could be mistaken for heresy or witchcraft. People feared what they couldn't hear clearly. And if you couldn't explain what you were saying, that silence might be the rope tightening around your neck. Number 5. Being a widow or living alone in the Middle Ages, a woman without a man was a woman without protection. And without protection, she became a target. Widows, spinsters, and solitary women were often the first to be accused of witchcraft, not because of anything they did, but because of what they lacked: a husband. To live alone was to live without male supervision, and to many that meant you had too much freedom, too much control over your own life. If you were older, childless, poor, or simply kept to yourself, the suspicion deepened. A woman living alone at the edge of town became a canvas for every villager's fear and imagination. If someone's cow died or a storm destroyed crops, the blame fell on the quiet woman by the woods. Many widows inherited property, and property meant power. If a land dispute arose, accusing the woman of witchcraft became a weapon. The state took the land. The church took her soul. She lived alone, and so she would die alone. 4. Having a birthmark or mole. In today's world, a birthmark is harmless, even charming. But in the Middle Ages, it could be your death sentence. Witch hunters believed that witches bore a physical mark of the devil, a sign on the body where Satan had kissed or suckled them. This mark could be a mole, freckle, scar, skin tag, or even an insect bite. Something as ordinary as a dark spot on your back could be twisted into evidence of evil. If you had a strange-shaped mole, you were said to have made a pact with demons. If you had more than one, you weren't just a witch, you were a high-ranking one. These markings, natural, inherited, or caused by illness, became symbols of guilt. Because in a world ruled by fear, the body itself was a battleground, and your skin could speak against you, even if your lips stayed silent. 3. Predicting the weather or being near bad luck. Imagine saying, "Looks like rain," and then clouds gather. In the Middle Ages, that wasn't seen as being observant. It was seen as sorcery. Any accurate prediction, any intuition or coincidence that lined up with nature's chaos could spark suspicion. If you said a storm was coming, and one came, you were accused of summoning it. If someone fell ill after you gave them advice, you cursed them. And if you were simply near when something bad happened, a fire, a miscarriage, a dead animal, people began connecting dots that were never meant to connect. In many villages, the line between bad luck and black magic was razor thin. People feared what they couldn't control. And when crops failed, plagues spread, or children died in their sleep, they needed someone to blame. The lonely woman with sharp eyes who said, "The wind feels strange today," became a scapegoat. So did the quiet neighbor who looked at your sick child too long. Because in the medieval mind, coincidence was never coincidence. It was intent. And if nature listened to your words, even once, they believed something unnatural was listening too. 2. Being kind to the wrong person. In a time when fear ruled over reason, even kindness could be twisted into evidence of witchcraft. If you gave bread to a beggar, helped a sick child, or offered herbs to someone suffering, and later that person recovered miraculously, suspicion followed. She must have used a charm. That wasn't healing, it was magic. But the opposite was just as dangerous. If you were kind to someone and their life took a turn for the worse afterward, they said your gift was a curse in disguise. She smiled when she handed it to me. That was the spell. Sometimes just helping the wrong person, an outsider, a drunk, a child out of wedlock, could stain your reputation. If that person got into trouble or brought shame, your name became tied to theirs. And worst of all, if someone rejected your kindness and something bad happened to them later, it was said you were offended and took revenge through dark forces. In a superstitious society, there was no safe way to be generous. Good deeds didn't earn trust. They invited fear, because only a witch, they believed, could give something and change the world with it. 1. Being accused for any reason. In the Middle Ages, truth didn't save you. Once someone pointed a finger and whispered the word witch, your fate was no longer in your hands. You could be accused because of a jealous neighbor, a land dispute, a rejected suitor, or a simple argument. You could be innocent, devout, generous. None of it mattered. Accusations often came from fear, envy, or manipulation. A child cried at night. Witch. A man's crops failed. Witch. A husband cheated and got caught. His wife must be a witch for knowing. And once the word spread, everything became evidence. Your cat, your mole, your kindness, your silence, your dreams, your nightmares. Witch trials didn't seek truth. They sought confession. Often under torture, if you denied the charge, they'd say the devil gave you strength to lie. If you confessed under pain, they'd say it proved your guilt. It was a trap with no exit. In a world where reason bowed to fear, you didn't need to be a witch to be burned like one. You just needed to be blamed. Please subscribe.